Hey, there was a rally last week at the State House that you may or may not have paid attention to, but I think you should have.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
There's a thing called the Deaf Grassroots Movement that is getting a lot of momentum across America. You know, those who have the challenge of not being able to hear. I don't even know how to walk in their shoes. And I don't think a lot of us understand how to walk in their shoes. But tonight, we're going to spend a little bit of time trying to walk in their shoes. We will talk in broad strokes about what the commission here in Rhode Island is actually doing, and then we're going to talk to a representative of the the Deaf Grassroots Movement, if you will. And we have interpreters for both of our guests who do not speak and who cannot hear me. And so this ought to be an interesting exercise and one that we should be completely comfortable with. So we have to do a couple of things here studio-wise to make accommodations for this, but that's okay. Welcome aboard. Nice to have you to my State of Mind on this, what night is it, Lexi? It's Tuesday night, last time I checked. It's the sinus pressure. You know, the beautiful days come with the sinus pressure. I forgot my Claritin today. Anyway, let's get to some of the rundown and the things that are happening. Front page of the Providence Journal today. I'm really happy that the Providence Journal has decided to do this kind of diligence. We'll kind of bring out that headline a little larger so you can take a good look at it. 15 report links to funded groups. This is what's going on here. The grant program in this state, the big one, which is the community action grants, which are grants anywhere from $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 and up, maybe to $100,000 to groups, towns, consortiums, you name it, they do it. And then there's the little grant program, which I think is government extortion of our legislators. The Providence Journal has been doing a little bit of diligence on both forms, and they now have some information that they ran on their website, and you can take a look. And by the way, you can go to the Providence Journal website. You can probably link through our own Fox Providence website, our PRI website. You can go to the state's website and find out where all this grant money is going. The funny thing about this whole thing is that finally we're getting the kind of pressure from the media on what really is a 15-year-old argument that I have had, that these grants have got to go. What's interesting is that the Journal tried to tie in fiduciary relationships between those legislators that are applying for grants for organizations, and they found that, you know, some 15 responded. There are only a handful of people who've been paid through or by those organizations, but there seems to be this kind of conceptual problem that if you're a senator like Senator Chacon from Providence, North Providence, and you've advocated for a grant, but you're unpaid on the board, that it's no big deal. It's a huge deal. It's influence, and it has to stop. And I'm hoping that the speaker, who I rumored, you know, we tape earlier in the day now, the Bay Area Speaker Mattiello, he's talking about actually filing some ethics legislation for a constitutional change. That's step one in cleaning up the act of the General Assembly. The big enchilada for me, and it should be for you, is this grant program. So we'll have more conversation about this as we go, but pay attention to it. Feels a little bit underwhelming and anticlimactic to talk about primaries in Nebraska and West Virginia, headlines for both, you know, whatever, right? I mean, well, Bernie's got more action going than anybody else here, trying to make a statement about still being in the hunt. Here's the latest.
West Virginia. Voters in Nebraska and West Virginia head to the polls today, where presumptive GOP nominee Donald Trump is running unopposed and expected to win big.
It's no fun this way. I want the primaries to keep going, but everybody's out. I'm the only one left. That's okay, right?
On the campaign trail, Trump's personal attacks on his likely Democratic opponent, Hillary Clinton, continue.
She's married to a man who was the worst abuser of women in the history of politics.
Wow. During a stop in Stone Ridge, Virginia on Monday, Clinton called Trump's rhetoric reckless and dangerous.
I'm not running against him. He's doing a fine job of doing that himself.
Clinton faces an uphill battle in West Virginia today, where polls show Bernie Sanders with the lead. The Vermont senator campaigned in front of a crowd of more than 15,000 people last night in Sacramento.
I think we got a good shot to win in West Virginia, in Kentucky, and in Oregon. And after those 3 states, we're coming to California on June 2nd.
Sanders needs a landslide win in California's primary to stay in the race.
All right, well, you've seen some of this action if you are watching at midnight. If you're watching at 7:30, you're still trying to figure out what the results are. Bernie just won't let go. The Donald looks bored, and without Republicans to fight, he's just picking fights with Bill Clinton, who, by the way, isn't running for the presidency of the United States. I mean, it feels so yesterday, doesn't it? So he's going to go after Bill, and now Hillary's going after him, or her pack is.
Because nobody respects women more than Donald Trump.
She came to my wedding. She ate like a pig. And seriously, the wedding cake was like missing in action.
Does she have a good body? No.
Of course.
Does she have a fat ass? Absolutely.
Well, I just don't respect her as a journalist. I have no respect for her. I don't think she's very good. I think she's highly overrated. But when I came out, and you could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever.
Well, obviously, it's great outer beauty. I mean, we could say politically correct that the look doesn't matter, but the look obviously matters. Like you wouldn't have your job if you weren't beautiful.
Donald Trump knocking supermodel Heidi Klum in the New York Times, saying Heidi Klum, sadly, she's no longer a 10.
A person who's flat-chested is very hard to be a 10, okay?
Right.
You know what? The women get it better than we do, folks. All right? They get it better than we do.
I see. So you treat women with respect.
I can't say that either.
All right, good.
By the way, the fat pig thing, that's Rosie O'Donnell, in case you're scoring at home from a while back. This is going to be the ugliest presidential race in the history of the country. I mean, we've had some bad ones. This one's going to be ugly. It's just, I'll bet you by September we don't talk about a single issue. Anyway, so you lost your internet and your cable last night, and you're furious, huh? Again, we taped this program prior to my radio show, now weekdays 3 to 6 on WPRO. But just checking into the radio earlier today, I hear a lot of people complaining they want their money back, they want credit for their outage, it's wrong. Now look, I mean, if you're going to go get your $3.18 back prorated from Cox, I guess you have a consumer, be my guest. You ever look at the bright, and I know businesses who rely on the internet can get hurt, and that's not good, and I'm sure that relationship with Cox will get figured out. They had some kind of truncated line problem, they cut a line. Things happen in the technical world. But did anybody actually, take a moment to soak it in? That they couldn't get on the internet? Did anybody do a little flashback to the day when you actually just couldn't be online? And, gee, did the kids actually end up talking to each other? Geez, did any chance they went out and rode a bike? Played in the yard, came home late for dinner because they were playing? Is that possible? I don't know. All right, to the headline that caused our interest last week, the rights of those who are deaf. As simple as that. There's no, no mincing words for those who cannot hear. That is the term we use. And I'm pleased to meet Stephen Florio, who's the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Steve, welcome to the broadcast. Nice to have you.
Good evening, Dan. I'm thrilled to be here this evening.
And Christine West is our interpreter. So I'm talking to Steve. Christine's interpreting. I'm not ignoring Christine. I'm talking to Steve. So you'll get the flow. And if I don't, forgive me. It's a good experiment. Tell me, what does the Commission on Deaf and Hard of Hearing do here in Rhode Island?
Well, Dan, the commission was established back in 1977, and the intent is to recognize a group of deaf and hard of hearing individuals, and we are comprised of about 156,000 people in the state, and to be able to address issues about communication access, their rights, accessing the system. This is a vulnerable group of people. We also are charged with 9 legislative mandates, and that includes an interpreter referral service and administering that, providing interpreters to the community. Also going through the legislative process, lobbying for progressive legislation, doing needs assessments, and exploring solutions to address some of those needs out in the community. We are also able to offer solutions and collaborative partnerships with various departments and organizations to ensure that they're meeting the goal of providing accessible communication and solutions for deaf and hard of hearing folks here in the state.
All right, good. You know, when we come back, we'll broaden that conversation out a little bit, talk about who fits into this category of service from the commission, and then later on we'll talk to a representative of the movement that staged the rally last week. Don't go anywhere. We are discussing, well, the rally that happened last week inspired us to invite our guest, Stephen Florio, in. You're also going to meet Jill DeCosta from the Deaf Grassroots Movement coming up later on in the program to talk about, you know, what their issues are. I'm guessing they are plentiful. You know, I find this a fascinating conversation. I'm actually surprised about the size of the number of people that are in the category of needing, you know, outreach and liaisonship and all of that here with the state. Steve's the executive director of the Rhode Island Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. You know, it's funny, I have a sister who has a significant hearing loss, just spent, I don't know, $7,000 on new hearing aids, and I have to tell you, it was an experience for me just this past weekend when I was at a family party and she was all excited about her hearing aids. She speaks very loudly, and she got her hearing aids, and it was emotional for the entire family because she was very soft-spoken for the first time in I could remember. There aren't a lot of folks who are paying attention to the needs of other people, period, in the world, never mind those who are hard of hearing. Now, when you are absolutely, clearly deaf, it's another situation, but I'm guessing there are a lot of people that are on the spectrum from completely deaf to not so, right? So explain that to me a little bit.
Sure, Dan. Like I said, there are about 156,000 deaf and hard of hearing people in the state of Rhode Island. And there are those who are profoundly deaf and they use American Sign Language to communicate. They've been deaf since birth. That also spans those who had the ability to hear since birth and eventually lost their hearing over time. Of important note is those individuals who are returning back from the war, those veterans, the #1 disability that they're coming back with is hearing loss. We also have an aging baby boomer population who is facing diminished hearing as well. So 1 in 5 people, for those who are 12 years and above, for our children's population is also faced with hearing loss. One of the challenges that we have is hearing loss is considered an invisible disability. I happen to be deaf, I happen to use ASL, and I basically was a part of that rally that focused on those issues at the Deaf Grassroots Movement, the rally that took place this past week.
So the question that I have is, amongst many, do you have more challenges with government and regulation or the culture of hearing people accommodating, treating you equitably, but recognizing the challenges? I'm guessing it's both, but which is worse?
To be honest with you, both, Dan. You're absolutely right. We basically introduce several bills every year. There's one bill, House Bill 7978, which is encouraging the state of Rhode Island to provide language assessments for deaf and hard of hearing children in the state. And we want to ensure that milestones are tracked in both ASL and English for those children from ages 0 to 8. They're a very vulnerable population because there is no mechanism by which to measure those language milestones, and we're hoping to establish one. Also, House Bill 7979 is another piece of legislation that we've been promoting, and that's to encourage open captioning to be available at movie theaters. So that way deaf and hard of hearing folks can be able to participate in some of those recreational activities.
And we've had some discussion about things as simple as drive-thrus.
Absolutely. That's another House Bill 7490 that's currently pending in the legislature, and drive-through restaurants are not accessible to deaf and hard of hearing folks because the communication is a sound-based system. We're taxpayers, we're part of the community, and we're professionals, and as a result we want equal treatment. And we're not able to access some of those conveniences and benefits that other hearing people have. Having sound-based systems only and having businesses rely on that technology only excludes a large number of people, a huge segment of the population. And if we can include some more text-based system, more visual systems, touchscreen kiosks, things like that, then we can certainly help to include more people.
All right, look, there's no doubt in my mind that this television show will feel like it's well short of the importance of this conversation. So I want to meet our other guest, and I promise you we'll have you back as early and often, because I'm guessing that there are really a lot of single issues that we can expand on here, and I promise to be able to do that. But in totality, if you can offer me a general answer to a very general question, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, where are we legislatively and culturally in making the kind of accommodations and or understanding the challenge? In other words, making it better for you to feel like you are on equal footing. You know, where have we been and where are we now?
With the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, we're now 25 years into that piece of legislation, and so we are well far behind where we should be. And I would say we're probably about 3 or 4 on that scale. We're not even close to being at number 10. We've made a lot of progress since that time and since the passage of that law, but we still have a long way to go. In terms of recognizing American Sign Language as a bona fide and viable language, as far as technology that's available, and improving the consumer environment out there. So I would say 3 out of 10, Dan. That's where we are right now.
All right, well, that's not good enough. Nice to meet you. We'll have you back. Appreciate it. When we come back, we will meet a representative from the Deaf Grassroots Movement. You know, the rally last week. Stay with us. So again, there was a rally last week at the State House sponsored by the Deaf Grassroots Movement, which reportedly is rising in all 50 states in America, and Jill DeCosta represents the movement here in Rhode Island. Other than moving to Rhode Island when she was 5 from Connecticut, almost a lifelong Rhode Islander, a little longer than me. You're not packing a lunch, you know. Rhode Islanders are pretty tough about being a native. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. Pleasure to be here.
You bet. What's the movement all about?
Well, the Deaf Grassroots Movement was a national effort to bring about concerns from the deaf community about 3 main things. And that was basically communication, education, and jobs. Basically, it was a bottom-up movement to effect change. And basically all 50 states had deaf and hard of hearing folks assembling at their respective state capitals. In terms of communication, one of the issues that constantly comes up is the availability of interpreters in healthcare settings, and that's something that I've experienced personally in my family. In terms of education, we see sign language, American Sign Language, as a basic human right, that it's not an option. And that's a quote actually that's taken from Dr. Roz Rosen.
Not an option. Not an option for who?
For deaf people. It's not an option for deaf people. It's a basic human right.
Well, I don't understand. What are there too many people who are deaf who don't know the language and have not been schooled? Is that what we're talking about?
When we talk about access, we're talking about receiving services out in the public through a sign language interpreter or through other means. And oftentimes, those services are not provided to us, and so we're forced to have to communicate in a different way, and so there's no respect given to our language. In addition to that, there is a Lead K organization, which is Language Equality and Accessibility for Deaf Kids, and that particular organization has been working very hard in Rhode Island to be able to pass the bill that Steve had mentioned about language assessments for deaf children.
You know, honestly, I'm going through a kind of a holy cow moment here. Because as you're speaking, my wheels are turning on how many different places every single day you go and no one knows what the hell you're saying. And never mind recognizing that without eyesight, you can't hear what's being said. So I'm guessing that you need the services, and I'm guessing that you need folks like Christine. If you just tuned in, by the way, Christine's interpreting for Jill and our previous guest, Steve Florio, from the Commission. But what can the general public do to make it better for you? Should we be teaching students in elementary school at least basic sign language so that there's a normalcy for deaf kids from the get-go?
Sure, absolutely.
It's kind of like
it also
duh,
starts,
right? It's a duh, you know, duh, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
How hard would that be? How hard would that be to do?
All of my children have learned ASL from me, and it doesn't matter whether you're hearing or deaf. It's a language. It's a visual language. Anyone has the capacity to acquire that language as they would any other.
Can your children
There are
hear?
plenty of resources that are available. There are DVDs, there are TV shows out there. So there's a proliferation of resources that are out there for anyone, deaf or hearing, to learn the language.
Can your children hear?
I have 3 children. My oldest is hearing, my oldest is deaf, excuse me. My middle is hearing, and my third is deaf. And yes, 3 generations back.
All right, so I'm sorry.
They live in Maryland, they're not here in state. There are better services that are available for them.
And so that's a lifestyle decision you have to make based on those challenges. All right.
Exactly.
All right. You know, I only have a minute left. I promise to have you back, and I'd like to have you on the radio. You should not be on the radio. You know, have interpreter will travel. You know, so we'll have you on the radio for a longer conversation. But what do you want to say to the people of Rhode Island about the movement and what we need to do in 30 seconds or less?
Well, just make it happen. We want full and equal access for the deaf and hard of hearing community. And we're looking to Governor Raimondo to respond to some of the concerns that we shared during the rally. Whether it's jobs, whether it's communication access, whether it's education, these are concerns that are valid, and we would like to see some changes going forward.
Right.
And it's great to have the media involved and having you invite us on, Dan. We appreciate that.
We'll do more soon, promise. Fascinating. If you don't feel a little sense of guilt, I know I do. We'll be right back. Seriously, I mean, if you don't think this is an awakening conversation, I promise we will do more on this particular matter, on the issues of the deaf. Tomorrow, what is it, vaping? We're vaping. See you on the radio, 3 to 6 on WPRO. Good night.